I worked very briefly for public, and I would say that my compensation was fair. It's a very good entry-level position. I've also made $12 an hour before working for a private company.
Hey there, it's Hannah Williams from Salary Transparency, and welcome to our new show, The Break Room. Today, we're at the Capital One Cafe in Anacostia in Washington, D.C., and we're talking to first responders. We've noticed an alarming trend in our street interviews. EMTs are not paid what you would expect. In fact, on average, the people you're trusting to help you in an emergency are not making much more than $20 an hour. We assembled an impressive duo of first responders to talk with you today. Let's hear what they have to say.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm 26 years old. I live in the DC metro area, and I am an EMTB.
I'm Lucas. I'm 18 years old from Reno, Nevada, but I go to school in Washington, D.C., and I'm an EMT.
I have been an EMT for about 7 years.
I've been an EMT for coming up to 7 months now.
I make right now $25 an hour.
I make $25 an hour, give or take, with differentials.
What is a first responder?
I think a first responder is anyone that's first on scene to an emergency, crisis, public health issue, anything like that.
I certainly think it's a broad range of things. I mean, we think about like paramedics and the people that ride the ambulances, but we also have like officers, nurses. It's a whole chain of command. So
yeah, I think there's also people kind of behind the scenes that people don't really talk about. I mean, for us, we have a lot of interaction with dispatchers and other public health officials going to different hospitals, stuff like that. So there's a lot of people that don't necessarily get in the news or get heard about for their part in these emergencies.
Right.
Why did you choose to become an EMT/first responder?
So I took the class when I was in college, and initially I wanted to go to med school, and I thought it was a really good way to just get introed into a lot of the medical practices and kind of the hospital setting. And through my experience originally as an EMT, I realized that I like being out in the field a lot more. So I obviously didn't go to med school, I'm not a doctor, but I really enjoy kind of that interaction with patients day to day. So that's something that I continue to do in my free time.
I had never had any interest in medical, anything more than like Grey's Anatomy or something like that. And then I was at Dutch Bros about a year ago. There was a really bad car accident right there. One of the cars went up in flames, and I ran in, tried to help, but kind of felt a little lost in not having a full understanding of what to do. I had my CPR card, and that's kind of it. And so I kind of felt a little helpless, and that's when I found a program in Arizona that I could become an EMT. So I went and did that, and first shift fell in love with it, and here I am.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, which is it's nice just to have that skill set of understanding kind of what to do in crisis in a way. And I think one of my favorite experiences with this job too is walking into every situation, not really knowing what you're walking into, but having the confidence that you can address or help in some way is really empowering.
Yeah, I think it's positive and negative for that. There's situations that you can go into, and it's really exciting to try to take something that you don't know what's about to happen and go from there. And then there's situations where you don't know if you're walking into someone with a knife or a gun and having to take it from there.
And that's why it was really important to just build that safety net with all the responders as well. Like I know in my community we had a pretty good relationship with the police department, so if we were walking into an unsafe situation, and we also had a lot of social workers that would be there, it's nice to know that your skill set might not address it, but there's other people that can help with the situation.
Yeah, a lot of people you can call.
Yes. What types of situations might you find yourself in that may not come to mind for people?
For us, especially in DC, is overdoses. People think that EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, firefighters are just going to fires and EMTs are just going to shootings and stabbings, when at the end of the day, there's a lot of these issues that people don't really know about. The amount of overdose calls we go to, or homeless calls that we go to, or psychiatric drug, those are the ones that they don't necessarily see us doing. They see us doing CPR, they see us, doing mouth to mouth, but at the end of the day, that's not the majority of our calls. We have a lot, I guess, more likely calls to get that kind of come from more underlying problems in a community.
Right. Like the evolution of the emergency room and emergency doctors were just an extension of kind of becoming that social catch-all for a lot of people, which is really unfortunate. I go into a lot of situations where it's simply people that weren't able to go to a doctor because they don't have insurance or they weren't able to get an appointment, and they escalate into a situation that's unfortunately much more dire than it previously could have been. So it's definitely one of the harder parts of the job for me. It gets a little disheartening, but it's also nice to know that you can try to address it in some way.
Yeah. What's one on-the-job memory you have as an EMT/first responder that you'll never forget?
Oh, the night shifts. I love working a good night shift. Sometimes they're super busy, you never know, and then other nights you have nothing and we end up in like a Taco Bell parking lot eating.
Just sitting there.
Yeah, eating chalupas or whatever. The night shifts, and then I would say I've had really good conversations with patients before. Sometimes when you're in the back of the ambulance and people aren't in their best situation, they're just really open with you, and it's kind of a moment of connection that you don't get, which obviously isn't the priority of our job, but it's nice to just have that human touch.
Yeah, I think I've had a good amount of those interactions where you really get to know a patient more than just what are your vital signs, what's your name, what's your age,
Right.
but really getting to know why they're here, the different issues that have caused that. I think for me, the biggest on-the-job thing that will always be with me is my first ever patient. That'll stick with me forever. We thought it was just going to be a sick patient, ended up being a full cardiac arrest, and I lost her. And I think as it being my first ever call, not knowing what I'm walking into, thinking it's just going to be a sick patient, it really shows what we don't know. And we go in not knowing a lot of the facts, and then you have to go from there. And we tried everything we could for like 45 minutes, but at the end of the day, just sometimes it doesn't work out.
You very much have to compartmentalize in this job because you're constantly on the go, and whenever you're in a new situation, you have to focus on that person. But at the end of the day, when you go home and just decompress, I feel like I kind of have the same people that pop up in my head sometimes.
Yeah, same people from the shifts before.
Right.
You have to try to remember that at the end of the day, it's just a job.
Right.
And it's an important job, but it's one that you have to be able to live your life separate from, because your mental health will go down very fast if you don't.
How do you have memorable partners, or how are your relationships with people you worked with?
I think that partner for my first ever shift, I love him to death. He taught me so much, and I kind of bounce around with different partners. I've only had the same partner a couple times, and I feel like sometimes you get along with them really well and build that connection and really make it more than a job. You're having fun, you're messing around, and sometimes you sit there in silence for 18 hours and just don't speak to each other. But I definitely do have partners that I've worked with, and it's been more than the job. What about you?
That's certainly one of my favorite parts of the job. I have partners that I still talk to on the phone, even though I live away from where I did. But yeah, it certainly also is a really important part of coping with the job, because you only have one other person that's in that same situation with you and really understands what you guys were working towards or what you were trying to address. So for me, it's been a good kind of bonding moment post-job. But I've also had partners where, you just go in and get the job done, and that's the understanding that you guys have.
Yeah, I think at least in DC, it's very hit or miss with your partners. I love it because it kind of adds its own challenge on being able to communicate with either your driver or your tech in the back, like trying to make it so at the end of the day we need to have that communication so we get the best patient care possible. We need to get to the hospital as soon as possible. We need to get their vitals taken. And you really at least need a competent partner to do that and be doing that bare minimum level of communication. Do you feel fairly compensated? What would be an appropriate compensation for your role?
I've been compensated all over the board, and part of it is I've worked full-time, I've worked part-time, I've also worked in different states, I worked for public, I've worked for private, and there's just a very wide range. I know I worked very briefly for public, and I would say that my compensation was fair. It's a very good entry-level position. I've also made $12 an hour before working for a private company. So you just really depends on where you're working and also what their contracts or what their clientele is. I would say that here in DC, I get compensated pretty fairly. It's usually around $25 an hour because they are getting larger private contracts. But if you're working at an underfunded municipality job, you could be making very, very little.
If you look outside of DC and look at other places, it's a very underfunded career. You look at people who are firefighter, paramedics, the amount of school it takes to do that, I don't think people understand. They think it's just maybe a blue collar job, just a trade job, but you have to go through a lot of education, a lot of training, not to mention keeping your certifications up, and it's not being compensated fairly in a lot of other places around the country. $12 an hour, that's really not enough to live off of, especially doing the job that we do. How many hours do you have to work to make a fair living? And kind of in what we do, you can't work beyond a certain point without your body just going into full shutdown and full burnout.
I also think the scope of practice and expectation in certain positions varies widely. So you can be working a municipality job where you're just an EMT basic or a paramedic and you're just doing the medical components, or there's other departments that you have to also be a firefighter and go through that training as well. So it's just across the board. I know friends that work ER jobs maybe once or twice a week and make $25 an hour, and I know friends that are expected to be first responders medically and firefighters and are making less than that. You just never know.
A lot of companies, they try to pay you as little as they can while keeping their employment rates up.
Right.
While in other places that have these bigger private contracts, it's easier to pay their employees more, keep their employees happy, give better benefits, because they just have the room in their budget to do that.
How long did it take you before you were able to remain calm in the face of emergencies?
I think I still am not that calm on the inside. I don't think there's a lot of times where you can be fully calm. Obviously, there are a lot of calls that we get that are much lower priority. You're going into someone with a basic cold, and there's not a lot to be worried about. You're looking out for those big important things that could make it very serious. But when you're getting on scene with someone that is in cardiac arrest or has been shot or stabbed, there's a very different thing going on in your head versus what's going on outside. I don't know if that's been your experience, but I think with me, you have to take a sec to say, okay, stay calm. What are these steps? We have these steps in our head that we go over that have been implanted in from our training, and it's a lot of acronyms and just following that down and making sure you're aware of everything going on in the situation while also staying calm.
For me, it's just the confidence in my ability to address the situation. Like you said, you really just have to rely on your training and trust the process, that the people have trained you and that your partner knows what's going on and that the resources around you can help you get to a better place in the situation. And also the fact that whatever you're feeling inside, the patient is feeling 10 times worse and more distressed about, and there's someone that's looking to you for answers or help, and that kind of shocks you into stop thinking about yourself or freaking out, right? Because there's someone else that is the priority. So for me, it's shifting my focus just away from how I'm emotionally feeling in that moment to whatever's in front of me. It's also understanding your place in the process, because we're never there to get the final answers for the patient. We're there to triage the situation and get them to greater help as fast as we can. So that's part of it as well, is knowing that there's someone else that I'm taking you to that's going to know even more than I do. So I just have to get us to a place where I can get you there.
How do you handle the emotional toll of working in such a high intensity field?
It's being able to compartmentalize in the moment relying on the relationship that I have with my partner or the support system that whatever your agency or your rig has set up, and then also just being able to go home and decompress after. So for me, it's feeling like there's a really safe environment that I can personally return to at the end of my shift, which is usually just going home or talking to one of my friends or my family, just being able to reconnect to my life and my outside world other than what went over my shift that day.
I think a lot of these EMS agencies have really good support staff that are set up. If you need to get, therapy or you need to really talk to anyone, they have a lot of places lined up for you to be able to do that easily, either on shift or off shift. I think it's important that you have a strong support staff of friends and family and people outside of work that you can decompress. I think for me, I watch a lot of mindless shows when I get back, and just turning on an episode of The Office can be everything for that day. It can calm you down, not make you think about the stuff that you just saw. And I think you're right, you have to be able to compartmentalize the issues, because you have to try to make it a job and not take your patients back to your house and be thinking about it there, because you need to be able to live your life for your own mental health.
Because we are responders and our job is serving others a lot of the time, it's really easy for me personally to lose sight of myself or recognize that I also have shortcomings and that I'm human at the end of the day. And sometimes when I'm upset about calls or situations, I can get kind of mad, like I'm letting my emotions interfere too much with the job. But I have to take a step back and just to acknowledge that I'm human too, and that's okay to feel emotional about these things. You're in hard situations.
What advice would you share with others interested in becoming a first responder?
I would explore the courses near you and just the opportunity. As we mentioned prior, EMT is kind of a good way to get your foot in the door. It's usually a shorter course training, about 6 months. I think mine was maybe 4 months. And that includes your classroom work and your practicum, so getting experience on the job. And that's also just the stepping stone for any of the other professions we talked about, right? So if you want to get your paramedic license, then you have to get your EMT license first. Most programs just do it on a continuation. And it's really applicable across multiple spheres. So you can go work like yourself at a national park or doing ski patrol or something like that. You could work in a city. You can volunteer even. A lot of people just value that skill. So don't be afraid to look into it. It's a good opportunity.
And I think volunteer is a big one, because there's a lot of volunteer fire departments, volunteer ambulance companies. There's volunteer stations everywhere. And if you're hoping to get the chance to maybe even just find out if you like it, a lot of them offer programs that you can do without any licensing, going along for the ride. You're riding with the EMTs, riding with the paramedics, riding with the firefighters, learning about what they do. I would recommend doing something like that, because I think for me, I took the risk in just immediately going out and doing my EMT without really knowing the full job capacity. I think there's a lot of different possibilities to follow it and know those.
Is working as a first responder a long-term profession?
I go through phases in my head that make me think that I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, because even with how stressful it is and how some days it really can suck, it's a great job, and you get to see people at their worst and make them better. And it's a really rewarding thing. Maybe not always in payment, maybe not always in, gratitude, but for ourselves, there's that self-gratitude, and you get to experience some really cool things. I kind of go back and forth between wanting to do something in business or law and doing something in first response, whether it's firefighter, law enforcement, EMS. I haven't really decided yet, but I think at the end of the day, I'm 18 and I have some time to figure that out.
As we've touched on, first response is a really broad category.
Yeah.
So even if you don't want to be an EMT or drive an ambulance for the rest of your life, I think a lot of people stick around with it. For me, the reasons you've touched on, they really like that feeling of adrenaline, they really like the community, they like the ambiguity, they like feeling useful. And so you see a lot of people move up in management or in some capacity, or say even work for a larger federal government. You could work for FEMA, you could work in disaster response, you could do administrative work, you could be a dispatcher. So I see a lot of opportunity to make first response a long-term profession in some ways. I don't know, just physically and emotionally, as we've talked about, the toll of being that 24/7 firefighter or ambulance driver is realistic. At some point your body and the emotional toll just gets to be a little too much.
Yeah, I think even if I decide to pursue a different kind of career area, I'm always going to try to at least keep EMS or some sort of first response in the back, being able to do it part-time. But you're totally right, there's more than just the three: law enforcement, fire, and EMS. There's all these different jobs that you can do. I think EMS might have one of the most broad categories because medical licenses are so valuable. You can go overseas, you can do Doctors Without Borders, you could do so much stuff in other countries as well, not to mention the stuff you can do in your own city with your licenses.
But I think that it'll always be, in some capacity, part of my life. I work mainly part-time right now, and it's more because I enjoy the environment and my coworkers than I do the pay. It's a nice perk, but I just like feeling that kind of ability to use the skill that I have to help others.
Yeah. Thanks for watching The Break Room.
We just wrapped another phenomenal panel, this time with EMTs, and it was so enlightening. We had somebody who had just started, has been doing this a couple months, and then another person who's been doing it 7 years. It really gave a full 360 view of what it means to be a first responder. I thought it was also really interesting to hear about how they take care of themselves outside of work. This job is incredibly difficult and it takes an emotional toll. It's incredibly important for them to preserve their mental health and take care of themselves, and for us to support them as well. If you enjoyed this episode, we would really appreciate if you give us a like and comment and subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. Catch you later. Bye.